It's week 4 of the NFL season. Raheem Mostert is the #1 player in all of fantasy football. Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, all of the running backs are beat up and injured right now. And our pets' heads are falling off. Just a little Dumb and Dumber humor to ease the tension. Should we be panicking? Absolutely not. Should you be worried? Of course, but we are still in a good spot to take down some fantasy championships. Headliner Nation, I know some of you are worried out there, especially if you've started 0-3, 1-2, but there's plenty of time left in the season. And even though the running back situation isn't what we would hope it to be at this point of the year, maybe we're getting all of those injuries out of the way early and we'll have fresh legs the rest of the season. And even with some of those top guys injured, other guys have emerged to give us the value that we need to win our fantasy championships. So hit that like button and let's dive into week 4 running back start and sits. Thursday night football, the Lions are going to head back to Lambeau Field where they brought down the Green Bay Packers last year to end Aaron Rodgers' run in Green Bay and their playoff hopes. And as of right now, it's not looking like David Montgomery will be ready to go again this week, which should leave another big opportunity for Jahmyr Gibbs. And I know you all have been disappointed with him so far. I also don't know why the Lions aren't utilizing him differently. Our only hope is that will get better. But now he's going to be going up a Green Bay Packers team that is in the bottom third of the league in terms of most rushing yards given up and most fantasy points allowed to the position. And 2 out of 3 weeks this season, Gibbs has been able to sneak his way inside the top 24 based on the volume he's getting in the passing game. We saw some of that explosiveness again in week 3, and hopefully we see it on Thursday night football in week 4. I think his coming out party would be best at Lambeau Field on Thursday night football with the country watching. Detroit's defense is really banged up, but they stepped up last week and completely shut down Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier for the Falcons. Now, if they get Aaron Jones this week, Aaron Jones is really going to have to make his money in the passing game. It sounds like he was close to playing last week. We'll have to see if he's able to make it back for Thursday night football. Part of the reason that they potentially ended up holding him out last week was knowing that he would have had a short week, and they rather would have had him on Thursday night football for Detroit. I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Jones is out there. There's going to be some risk given the injuries that he's coming off and the fact that Detroit's been so good against the run. But you know what? If Aaron Jones were even to miss this week again, we're not looking to A.J. Dillon. The reason we draft A.J. Dillon is for situations like this, when Aaron Jones misses time. And guess what? A.J. Dillon still hasn't done anything. So if you thought about starting him this week, I would go ahead and throw that thought out the door. For Atlanta and Jacksonville, this game is going to be over in London. So don't forget, make sure you set your lineups early because this game kicks off at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, they didn't do a whole lot last week. And that's unfortunate because Detroit's defense was really banged up. But this week, they get an even tougher matchup with Jacksonville and their run defense. Now, you might be saying, Kyle, if Jacksonville is so tough, why is Bijan Robinson in green? Well, it's because of the work he does in the passing game. This guy has got a safe floor every single week, even if the upside on the ground isn't exactly what we'd like it to be. Now, Tyler Algier has been a guy the last couple of weeks we've taken a look at starting. And last week, I honestly thought he had major top 24 potential going up against, again, I feel like I've said it 18 times at the start of the show, Detroit's banged up defense. But with it being a much tougher matchup this week, unfortunately, I'm going to have to pull back on Tyler Algier. Maybe he scores a touchdown, but even with that touchdown, I don't think we see more than 30 or 40 yards on the ground. Travis Etienne hasn't exactly shown you all the upside that you would have liked to have seen yet, but he's still at RB13, and he's given us 2 really good weeks, and unfortunately 1 poor week. But again, with the way the running back landscape looks right now, we're not sitting or even debating sitting a guy that's getting 80% of the touches out of the backfield, both on the ground and through the air. And he's playing 90% of the running back snaps. Tank Bigsby isn't doing anything except stealing a touchdown here or there. That's not enough for me to be worried about Travis Etienne. Unfortunately, he is a risk for me this week because of the matchup against Atlanta and how good they have been against the run this year. Really, what we need to happen in this game is we need Trevor Lawrence in the passing game to absolutely open up to start the game, put them in the lead, and then at that point, hopefully things will open up on the ground for Travis Etienne. Highest upside potential this week for me is probably low-end RB1 status. Raheem Mostert rushed for 3 touchdowns last week. Devon Achane, well, apparently he told reporters it's Achane, and we'll figure that out later in the week. But we're going to stick with Achane right now. He had 4 touchdowns, and both guys are going to be in yellow this week. This is a cautionary tale to those of you out there that are overreacting to one performance against one of the worst rushing defenses in all of football. Will both of these guys have value moving forward? Absolutely, but it is going to take some time to kind of sort out who is going to be the guy. Now, let me quickly walk you through a couple of concerns and why these guys are listed in yellow. This past week, there was no Jalen Waddle. When he comes back from his concussion, does that kind of switch things up a little bit? Number 2, the Miami Dolphins won by 50 points. That game was in control the entire time against Denver. They could afford to just run the football, and guess what? It worked because Denver can't stop the run right now. In a matchup like this, going up against Buffalo, where the run defense is going to be a little bit better, and you're going to have an offense that's going to be able to potentially stick with you a little bit more, and by the way, you're going to be on the road as well. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out this week with Achane and Mostert. Miami's defense hasn't been great in terms of numbers, and part of the reason why is because their offense goes so quickly and puts up so many points, it puts them out on the field a whole lot more. So it isn't necessarily their fault. But if that happens, again, this week going up against Buffalo, Buffalo is a team that's going to take advantage of that defense a little bit more than what the Denver Broncos did. And while all of this is a cautionary tale for us to be very careful this week about the Miami backfield, we are going to learn some things this week. If this is a closer game, we will really find out if Achane or Mostert is the lead back. If I had to put money on one guy right now, I would go ahead and give it to Achane, which might sound a little bit weird. We know that they like him and we know that they drafted him, and really he was being utilized at the beginning of the game this past weekend a little bit more than what Mostert was. But even with that being said, I think you're going to see these guys play series at a time, not necessarily coming on and off the field to replace each other. They're really they're the same kind of stature. They're smaller backs that are built around speed that aren't going to be able to take a ton of hits. So both of these guys are probably going to split this backfield 50-50, maybe 55 or 60 in terms of Achane for right now. Both of them will probably be inside my top 24, but I don't know if I will put either inside my top 12 this week. And if you own either of them, I am willing to say let's go ahead and start them. But hopefully you're starting them more as like your RB2 or flex, and you're not really relying on them as your RB1. All right, now that I spent a large portion of this segment talking about and warning you about the Miami backfield, let's go ahead and talk about my boy James Cook. Yes, he's losing out on touchdowns in the red zone and at the goal line to Latavius Murray. I don't understand why, and Damian Harris. But this is still a guy, if you look at the numbers right now, that's putting up over 100 total yards per game and is getting more than a bulk of the snaps at the running back position. He's explosive, he's highly efficient on the ground, and maybe his ceiling hasn't been as high as we would have liked, but he's still up there in terms of yards and leading the league in rushing. He's a guy that, once again, we can't complain about the running back position right now. If you're going to be upset that James Cook is giving you over 100 total yards per game, I don't know what you're expecting about everybody else. Look at that. The Vikings trade for Cam Akers, and Alexander Mattison all of a sudden figures it out. Now, we know that it hasn't exactly been Madison's fault. Offensive line hasn't been great, and they pass the ball an awful lot. But now we get a really good matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers allow the third most fantasy points to the running back position, and they're ranked 27th in the league against the run right now. This is absolutely a great opportunity for Alexander Mattison to build on his performance from last week. Cam Akers, even if he's active this week, probably still won't see that big of a role. It's still going to be Alexander Mattison. But you know what's really good about this type of performance right here that we could get from him is the fact that if he goes off against Carolina, it's an opportunity to potentially sell high before Cam Akers gets more involved in the workload. I'm not actively looking to trade for Alexander Mattison right now. If you have him, I think he's going to be a really safe start this week. But if he has a big game, the potential might be there for us to cash in on that. Now, the Minnesota Vikings have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position, and Miles Sanders really doesn't have that big of an upside right now. On the ground, he's been okay. One thing that I do want to keep an eye on, though, is the fact that his targets each week have kind of built up a little bit. So his work in the passing game has gotten a little bit larger each of the last 3 weeks. If that continues to happen, that is going to definitely help increase what he could potentially see in terms of a ceiling. Now, Chuba Hubbard didn't do anything this past week, but the first 2 weeks of the season, he was probably a little bit more involved than what Miles Sanders owners would like. If you have to start Miles Sanders this week, I definitely would be very cautious on the type of ceiling you're hoping for. But the hope is if he can get around 15 carries, he can definitely get us above 10 fantasy points. Headliner Nation, I'm going to shock you all, because who would have thought that these two awful teams would be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week? Fellas, it's almost No Shave November, and Manscaped has got a ton of new beard products out there that's going to help you maintain that glorious fluff all winter long. Head on over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners when you check out. You're going to get 20% off the entire order and free shipping. And with the help of them, I'm already growing out the beard. I know I'm a little bit early, but let's talk some football now, because these two teams, the Broncos and the Bears, have given up the first and second most fantasy points to the running back position. And yes, we're going to talk about the Bears in a second, given that the Broncos got absolutely slaughtered last week. But let's start with Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams last week was on his way to a potential 20 carry day. He ended up getting pulled out of the game when things got out of control, though. And he was clearly the lead back over Samaje Perine and is clearly seeing more touches than him. Given this matchup, I truly believe that for the first time this season, Javonte Williams is going to be a safe start and is going to be firmly inside my top 24. Now, the Bears are middle of the pack when it comes to the amount of rushing yards that they're giving up, but they're giving up a ton of points to the position through the air and, of course, in scores. Every Kansas City running back was scoring last week, and they probably even took a couple of people out of the stands to score as well. But even with that being said, that helps inflate that number a little bit, and that's why Javonte Williams is more of a safe start for me than a high upside start, because he probably lacks the amount of carries that we would need to have more upside. And if he doesn't score, yeah, he could be pretty efficient on the ground, but we're probably looking at maybe 80 to 100 yards. So at that point, you're looking at like 8 to 10 fantasy points, which again is going to be safe for you. So maybe there's some lack in upside this week, but it's definitely the type of matchup that the Broncos want for Javonte Williams. Yes, the Denver Broncos got absolutely shredded last week, but there's a reason that the Chicago Bears running backs are not in green. Now, if you own either of these guys, I would be okay with you playing either of those guys, because I'm going to assume both of them are going to get some pretty decent work this week. But we still don't have a clear back in Chicago, and that makes things a lot murkier. Both of these guys are basically even across the board, and the only reason Roschon Johnson has more fantasy points is because he scored a touchdown in week 1. Now, when you take a look at the efficiency, Khalil Herbert is actually a lot better when it comes to efficiency than Roschon Johnson right now. That could all change this week. Honestly, if you start Khalil Herbert, there's a chance that Roschon Johnson ends up being the lead guy. If you start Roschon Johnson, there's a chance that Khalil Herbert could end up being the lead guy. And quite honestly, for my rankings, both of these guys will probably be mid to low RB2s, just because they're both going to have to work together, and we don't know who's going to take the most upside into this game. But this could tell us a lot about where the Bears want to head with this backfield and who we should trust over the coming weeks. Are you starting both of these guys? Absolutely. Are you starting them together? I wouldn't want to, but you probably could. Given the matchup going up against Denver, both of these guys do have good upside. We just have to be careful that the floor bottoms out if one of them takes over. We're heading from a really fun running back matchup to one of the toughest running back matchups this week with Baltimore and Cleveland. Cleveland's defense is absolutely number 1 in the league. You can see it on the screen in front of you. They rank number 1 in all major defensive categories, and they have allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs this year. Now, Gus Edwards with no Justice Hill was absolutely the play last week. But even if Justice Hill doesn't play this week, I can't see Gus Edwards having enough upside against this tough Browns defense to warrant possibly even starting him this week. And if you have to, it's not looking good for your chances. Yeah, Jerome Ford scored last week. He scored twice last week, and he really had one big play through the air. When you take a look at all the numbers outside of that, though, Jerome Ford got lucky. He averaged 1.7 yards per carry last week, and now he's going up against a Baltimore defense that is going to be just as tough, if not tougher, than that Indianapolis Colts front. Jerome Ford, for me, is a guy this week that, once again, I don't really want to throw out there, and if I do, I've got my fingers crossed, and I'm hoping for a touchdown. Kareem Hunt's probably going to see a little bit more work this week than he did last week, and they're going to continue to build him up. And even if Jerome Ford continues to score touchdowns, if he doesn't get back to being as explosive as he was the other night against Pittsburgh when he took over for Chubb, Kareem Hunt is going to start to see more and more work. Another matchup with two defenses that give up a ton of fantasy points to the running back position. And while I would like to get super excited for it, Najee Harris continues to suck. Is it all Harris's fault? Absolutely not. But at some point in time, we have to realize the thing that we've worried about the entire time with Najee Harris is that he just isn't efficient. It hasn't happened in his entire NFL career as of yet. Now, Jaylen Warren also ended up struggling this past week, but at one point, he had like 9 less carries than Najee Harris, but he only had like 5 less yards. The more explosive back in this offense right now is Jaylen Warren. And while I would love to run both of these guys out in this matchup this week, I've got to be concerned about it, especially after reports last week said Jaylen Warren was not only going to be the starter, but he was going to see an increased workload as well. And that just didn't end up happening the way that we would have liked. Najee Harris this week is a guy that if you're banking on 8 to 10 fantasy points, he can probably put you in that area, especially if he scores going up against this Houston Texans defense. Jaylen Warren, for me, will be another week of wanting to utilize him really only in PPR leagues until he does start to take way more of a workload. Yes, Dameon Pierce lucked out last week. That touchdown is the only thing that really saved his performance, but this is the type of week where we could really see him get going again because this Pittsburgh defense has not been able to stop the running game all season long. And I think the biggest thing that's going to help Dameon Pierce moving forward is the fact that people are going to have to start respecting the passing game a lot more. Teams really were just saying, hey, we're going to stop you on the ground and we're going to make CJ Stroud beat us through the air. And guess what? He's been beating them through the air. So now that teams will hopefully start to respect the passing game and CJ Stroud a little bit more, it's going to open up some of those lanes from Dameon Pierce. We've been waiting for a big game. Is he a top 12 running back this week for me? Probably not top 12, but I'm going to have him locked firmly inside my top 24 with a little bit of top 12 upside sprinkled in. These two running backs, a lot of you probably want to see in green, and you're probably going to argue why they should be in green, but try to keep an open mind and let's talk about why they may have a little bit more risk than we would like this week. The good news for Kyren Williams is that he's the guy in this backfield. There's nobody really competing for touches with him right now, but he's getting a Colts defensive front that's pretty good at limiting the big plays, especially to the running back position. They cause a lot of pressure. So for Kyren Williams this week, for me, it's really all about staying consistent on the ground, but really needing a touchdown and a few catches to reach this ceiling that we would like to see for him. Now, I know Zach Moss is coming off back-to-back big games, but both of those games are without Anthony Richardson, because remember, that first game in week 2, he went out early in the game with a concussion. Gardner Minshew played 3/4 of that game almost. And of course, last week, there was no Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson is going to take carries on the ground away from Zach Moss. And Zach Moss wasn't super efficient last week either. He needed over 30 carries to get over 100 yards. He barely broke 4.1 yards per carry. So if you think that Zach Moss is going to continue to see over 30 touches a game, then he absolutely has the ceiling that you're all hoping for. But unfortunately, with Anthony Richardson on the field, I doubt 30 touches per game are going to be in the cards for him. So while Zach Moss is definitely still going to be a start this week, let's just be very careful if you're banking on the type of upside that you saw from weeks 2 and 3. You can blame it on the offensive line, you can blame it on the offensive scheme, you can blame it on whatever you want to, but one fact remains, I was absolutely right so far about Rachaad White. He is not efficient in any way, shape, or form. All of those concerns that I saw last year with him have carried over to this season so far, and now he's going to get a tough matchup going up against the New Orleans Saints. Probably if you have Rachaad White, you have to start him because you don't have any other options. But I'm getting worried about Rachaad White. I was already worried about him, but he's starting to reach unstartable status. The only reason we're still even including him in our lineups at this point is because he does receive a few catches through the air, so that's kind of helping prop that floor up a little bit. But the dude has virtually no upside, especially in tough matchups. If you have Alvin Kamara on your team, you're probably starting Alvin Kamara this week. The ceiling isn't going to be nearly as high as I would like because they probably are going to ease him back into the game plan a little bit. They're not going to send him out there with probably 20 touches right away. Is it possible? Yes, but I'm thinking more like maybe 10 carries on the ground and then 3 catches through the air. 13 to 15 touches this week is probably my ceiling for him. Now, because of that, he's not going to have a ton of upside for you, but that's okay because if you're waiting on Alvin Kamara, you probably don't have a lot of other options, so you're starting Alvin Kamara anyway. If you didn't already know it, the consistency percentage that you see on the screen is just the amount of times a running back finishes inside the top 24. And even though that number shows at 66% for Brian Robinson, honestly, it should be 100%. Because he was well on his way to another top 24 performance last week. But unfortunately, Washington kept turning over the ball and they fell behind and they were trying to battle and they had to stop running the football. But for 10 carries last week, Brian Robinson had 70 yards. He averaged 7 yards per carry last week, and what was not the easiest of matchups either. Now, unfortunately, this week, the matchup is going to get even tougher against the Eagles' defensive front. Brian Robinson just is not going to have the upside that we need, and quite honestly, would not be surprised if we see another performance similar to what he had last week, where he has like 10 carries and goes for 50 or 60 yards. He's really going to have to score a touchdown to help you out this week. Okay, DeAndre Swift has earned his green badge. He is a safe start moving forward, and it's because of how efficient he is behind this offensive line. Even though Kenneth Gainwell got a decent amount of carries last week and will continue to do so moving forward, DeAndre Swift is going to be the guy to start games. The only concern about DeAndre Swift is that if the Eagles have themselves a decent lead, they're going to use Kenneth Gainwell more because they want DeAndre Swift to stay healthy. And of course, that's something that Swift has had a really hard time doing over the course of his career. So an injury concern will always be in the back of our mind. But while he's healthy, we're starting him. And when we start him, we've got a good floor with a great ceiling. Listen, Joe Mixon hasn't been spectacular this season, but Joe Mixon has been a guy that has had a safe floor every single week. And until this offense starts to get rolling forward, it's probably going to be a lot of the same thing. Joe Mixon is going to have a blow-up game here at any time, right? It happens every season. He has a huge game. But the offense as a whole just continues to sputter. And we saw it again, and a lot of it is built around Joe Burrow and that calf injury right now. So when you start Joe Mixon, you know that you're going to get a decent floor because he's been pretty efficient so far this season, averaging well over 4 yards a carry. And, you know, he's being utilized in the red zone. He's being utilized in the passing game. Really everything that you want from a top running back. He's just not really putting up those top numbers as of yet. Hopefully Derrick Henry is feeling a lot better than he did last week because he's going from one of the tougher matchups that he's seen all season to one of the better matches that he's going to see all season, because the Cincinnati Bengals have allowed the second most rushing yards to running backs this year. And over on Underdog, his rushing line for this game is currently set at 70.5 yards. I am hammering the higher on that pick'em. And if you're interested in playing this pick'em with us or any of the other ones that we do throughout the week, make sure you download the Underdog app and use code word headliners, because they're running a special right now that they will match your deposit not just up to $100, but up to $500. $500 when you use our code word. Listen, if you don't have that kind of bankroll, it's okay, but that's potentially $500 free for you to head on over there and put some money down along with us. I would imagine that this line is going to move throughout the week, because if we find out at any point in time that he's a lot healthier than he was this past week, I guarantee 70.5 yards is going to jump, and is going to jump quickly. So this is one that I definitely would take earlier in the week. I think he bounces back, and I think he has one of those huge Derrick Henry performances that we have come to see. Tennessee has struggled passing the ball, and they're going to want to keep it away from Joe Burrow on that offense, regardless of how much they have struggled. I think we're going to see upwards of 30 total touches for Derrick Henry this week. I know Josh Jacobs probably shouldn't be listed in green, but the dude is getting more combined touches than almost any other running back in the NFL, and he's being utilized in the passing game as well. We're just going to have to stay confident that at some point in time, Josh Jacobs is going to turn this thing around. I know he hasn't given you the best performances as of yet, but last year he started a little bit on the slower side as well, and keep in mind, this is a guy that held out for the majority of training camp. So if he's still shaking off some rust and really getting into game form, that really could be coming very, very soon. I'm staying confident that Josh Jacobs is going to turn this thing around, because he's getting more than enough volume to support some huge upside when he does figure it out. There's really only one thing I can say about the Los Angeles Chargers, and I'm going to make this part of the segment very, very quick. Please come back, Austin Eckler. Save us from Joshua Kelly. The start to the season for Ramondre Stevenson has been up and down. There's been some weird usage from the Patriots, and this past week he struggled quite a bit. And this matchup isn't going to get any easier going up against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, he's still out-touching Zeke Elliott. He's still putting together more combined yards, and he really hasn't been pulled off the field in those moments that matter most. My hope for Ramondre Stevenson this week is that they utilize him a lot in the passing game as a way to get the ball out quickly and keep that defensive line from absolutely killing Mac Jones. They're not going to be able to hold the ball that long this week. Now, the Cowboys defense in terms of rushing yards have also given up quite a bit this season. That is the one area where they have seemed to lack a little bit. So hopefully Ramondre Stevenson can get going. But also in the same breath, I would not be surprised if they utilize Zeke Elliott as well to let him have a revenge game against the Dallas Cowboys. If you want to risk it and you want to play into the narrative that the Patriots are going to give Zeke Elliott a ton of touches against his former team, then you could potentially start him if you like. But that's not the Bill Belichick way. Is he going to throw it back in their face? Absolutely. But he's going to do it more along the lines of getting into the red zone and then scoring 2 or 3 times with Zeke. He's not going to give him a ton of touches over Ramondre this week. At worst, I would see maybe a 50-50 split. Bill wants to win this game. He doesn't want to laugh at the Cowboys afterwards because he has Zeke now. He wants to laugh because he beat them. Tony Pollard is really doing everything that we would like out of a top running back right now, and he's getting all the volume. He's getting the plays on the ground. The dude looks awesome. So if you're starting Tony Pollard, congratulations, because he's definitely one of the safest starts that you have in fantasy football right now. James Conner had a tough matchup last week against the Dallas Cowboys, and he looked great. And now he's got an equally tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe not a ton of upside here, but James Conner is definitely a guy that we're not even consider sitting right now. He's getting way too much volume, and he's looked way too good on the ground this year. The biggest concern here is that Arizona falls behind early, and they fall behind by a lot. If that happens, that's going to diminish a lot of the upside of James Conner. If they can keep it safe, I do see them trying to run the football a little bit more and keep that San Francisco 49ers offense off the field. James Conner's a low risk this week, not because of his upside, but because of how much volume he is getting. Once again, at the running back position right now, we can't complain about guys that are getting the football because it's better than the guys that aren't getting the football and who have been hurt all season. Christian McCaffrey definitely is going to be the RB1 again this week. Most likely will go over 100 yards again this week. Keep in mind, Thursday Night Football last week, not surprised that he got pulled a little bit early and didn't see as much volume as we would have liked, and definitely should find the end zone once again as well. It's tough to know what to do with this Kansas City backfield right now. All 3 of these running backs finished inside the top 17 last week because all of them scored. Now, going up against the New York Jets, I don't know if we can rely on that once again. That's why McKinnon and CEH are going to be in red for me. But Isaiah Pacheco continues to be the lead guy. He's seeing the most volume in my opinion, and he's a guy that's being utilized the most as well. Because of that, even though he's a risky start, he's the one risk that I would be willing to take out of this backfield. The Chiefs defense is looking really good, and after Chris Jones missed week 1, he's back in the fold, and this defense has looked really dominant against the run. That is not good news for Breece Hall or Dalvin Cook. I'm definitely not starting Dalvin Cook anymore anytime soon. Breece Hall is still a guy that I would be willing to start. And if you have to start him in this matchup, then feel more than welcome to. But you're probably going to be seeing a lot of what we saw over the last couple of weeks from him, and that upside just isn't going to be there. I'm going to be honest with you. There is a really, really good chance that Kenneth Walker will be my RB2 this week. I am absolutely in love with his potential. Love the matchup last week. He showed out. 2 weeks ago against Detroit, tougher matchup, but he scored 2 touchdowns. He's one of the best running backs in all of football right now. He's getting the touches. Zach Charbonnet hasn't mattered at all. Kenneth Walker is the dude in that offense. They're going to continue to run the ball with him. And given all the weapons that they have there at the wide receiver position, is leading to a ton of open holes on the offensive line and some really good one-on-one matchups for him through the air. Kenneth Walker is in for another big week. I'm not really interested in starting Matt Breida this week. Saquon Barkley would be the only guy I'm starting if he ends up returning. And they did talk about that this week, that there is potential that he would only miss 1 game. So keep an eye on that throughout the week. If he ends up being a game time decision, we'll switch him over to yellow. But for as of right now, not knowing whether or not he will play, he'll end up being in red for me. But of course, if he plays, he's going to be in your lineup. There you have it, Headliner Nation, my start and sit show for running backs in week 4 of the NFL season. Make sure you hit that like button for me. And if you're new here to the channel, you got to subscribe and stick around for the rest of the content this season. And leave me a comment down below. Who's one guy this week that you expect to step up and have their biggest performance yet? Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.